So good evening. My name is Philip Bloom. I'm the June and Simon Casey Lee Curator of the Chinese Garden at the Huntington. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the first talk in our fall 2021 East Asian Gardens lecture series. I'd like to express my particular thanks to the Justin Banya Memorial Fund for supporting tonight's lecture and many of our educational programs in the Chinese Garden. As is very obvious from where we all are, we're holding our lectures online this fall. We hope to be able to hold at least some of them in person, but the ongoing uncertainty of the pandemic convinced us otherwise. So at least through the end of the year and possibly into the spring, we'll continue to be holding these lectures online. And as always, the lectures are recorded and they're posted to the Huntington's website a day or two after each talk. So you can always see the lecture even if you're not able to attend when it's live. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, Professor Qianshen Bai of Zhejiang University, I'd first like to introduce a very special guest, Dr. Nicole Cavender. Dr. Cavender joined the Huntington a little less than 4 months ago as the new Talene Jorgensen Director of the Botanical Gardens. Dr. Cavender holds a PhD in horticulture and crop science from the Ohio State University. And before coming to the Huntington, she served as Vice President of Science and Conservation at the Morton Arboretum in Chicago, where she had extensive experience collaborating with plant scientists in China. In the short time that she's been at the Huntington, she's listened very actively and generously to my colleagues and me in the Botanical Division, and she's already made some very positive changes to our division. And I think we're all really looking forward to working with her to ensure the long-term sustainability of our fantastic gardens. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Nicole Cavender.
Thank you, Philip. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so glad to see so many people tuning in to what I'm sure will be a great program. I just wanted to say a few words of how glad I am to be here, but I'm also just so excited that I get to help sustain and oversee the Chinese Garden and its wonderful art and culture. You know, the Chinese Garden is so special. It really transports us to a completely different world. And not only do we get to have all these wonderful plants in it, world-class plants, world-class penjing, but we also have this immersion and cultural experience, which I'm so delighted that I get to learn along with everyone else. So I'm just here to learn and listen, and I'm so excited to hear our speaker tonight. And the calligraphy is amazing, and I've learned so much already. So thank you for all being here, and I hope to be able to see you all in person sometime.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cavender, and welcome again to the Huntington. It's wonderful to be able to work with you. I'm going to share my screen so I can show a couple of slides as I introduce tonight's lecture. So last week was a pretty exciting time for the Huntington's Chinese Garden. After about 2 years of planning and a year and a half of delays, we opened the inaugural exhibition in our new art gallery, which is called the Studio for Lodging the Mind. The inaugural exhibition is A Garden of Words, the calligraphy of Liu Fangyuan, and it focuses on the original works of calligraphy in ink on paper that were written as models for the wooden name placards, the tile carvings, and the stone inscriptions that adorn the garden. Over the course of the 15-year process of building the Chinese art garden, we've commissioned more than 30 contemporary calligraphers from mainland China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, the US, and the UK to brush name placards and poetic couplets. So the exhibition uses their works to introduce the art of calligraphy to both English and Chinese reading visitors. The exhibition begins with a discussion of what a Chinese character is and how characters convey meaning. We then look at the materials that are used in creating calligraphy, and we show a selection of different works that exemplify the kinds of varied visual effects that calligraphers can create just by varying the same very simple materials. The third section of the exhibition focuses on the 5 major script types that are used in calligraphy today. And then there's a final section that looks at some of the ways that artists are innovating within this 3,000-year-old tradition, and innovating particularly by looking to forgotten models from the past. The physical artworks are accompanied by 2 videos, one of which shows a calligrapher writing the same character in all 5 different script types, and another that shows, that includes interviews with 8 of the artists who contributed to the exhibition. This latter video provides some insights into how the artists learn calligraphy, how they go about conceptualizing their work, the kinds of materials they use, and ultimately what calligraphy really means to them. And I very much hope everyone can see the exhibition in person. But if you can't, we have a website that includes essentially all of the materials from the exhibition, including descriptions of the works, photographs, and also copies of the 2 videos. And as part of the exhibition, we've organized this lecture series that will extend through the rest of the fall, as well as 2 demonstrations. And so for more information about the exhibition and these associated events, please do look at our webpage, which you can access through the Huntington's website. So one of the stars of the video, in fact, he's the very first person who was interviewed in it, is tonight's speaker, Professor Qianshen Bai of Zhejiang University, who is joining us tonight from Hangzhou, China. Professor Bai's works are featured throughout the garden, including on the title placard for the gallery. And 2 of his inscriptions will be highlighted in the second half of the exhibition that opens in late January 2022. Professor Bai is a historian and practitioner of calligraphy, and is currently serving as the Dean of the School of Art and Archaeology at Zhejiang University. He previously taught for 18 years at Boston University, where he led an innovative graduate program that combined both the study of the history and the practice of calligraphy. His English language publications include a remarkable monograph called Fushan's World, The Transformation of Chinese Calligraphy in the 17th Century. He's published a number of fascinating essays on the eccentric painter and calligrapher Bada Shanren, and he's also published some significant studies of the role of epigraphy in Qing Dynasty calligraphy. He's published even more extensively in Chinese, and his own works of calligraphy have been the subject of several exhibition catalogs. The most popular journal of calligraphy in China, Shufa, named him one of its top 10 calligraphers in 2004. Throughout his career, Professor Bai has been a generous mentor to many students and young scholars, including me, and he's also been a particularly dear friend to the Chinese Garden at the Huntington. So tonight he'll share with us some thoughts on the art of Chinese calligraphy. At any time during Professor Bai's talk, please feel free to enter questions into the Q&A box that appears either at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on your device. And at the end of Professor Bai's talk, I will pose those questions to him. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Bai Qianshen.
Hi, hi everyone. Good evening. Many thanks for the Huntington Library to invite me to give this lecture. And I will share some of my thoughts on Chinese calligraphy. My lecture is probably, I hope it's not too boring, and because this is a very unique art in China. And for me, who have studied the Chinese calligraphy for 40 years, still have some puzzling questions. So I want to try to share with you my questions, and I may not have perfect answers, but I will try to provide some thoughts, and we can think about them together. In 1990, a Swiss scholar, Blatter, wrote a book entitled The Chinese Art of Writing. So though in this book, he uses the term calligraphy, he is keenly aware how problematic this word is. That is probably why he uses art of writing for his book title. The art of writing here does not refer to written text, but the artistic and aesthetic values. So when reviewing the lecturer's book, American critic wrote, since the dawn of its civilization, China has cultivated a particular branch of visual arts that has no equivalent anywhere else in the world. On first encounter, Westerners misnamed it calligraphy by false analogy with a mere decorative craft that was more familiar to them. That is a book review published in 1996. Belater is one of the few people in the West who realize that there exists one more art in China and East Asia. Let us see what Picasso has said. Picasso's painting, there's a caption on the Picasso's painting. He says, if I were born Chinese, I wouldn't be a painter, but a writer. I would write my pictures. But here, the writer doesn't mean a writer who produces beautiful essays, novels, but a calligrapher. Okay, so that's actually, he realized in China, actually, calligraphy has been more prestige than painting. If we accept that there has been one more art in China, we may ask the following questions. What made the writing the most treasured fine art in traditional China, and when? We may start from the writing as such, the Chinese characters. This is the earliest writing we found in a pot shot made in the Neolithic period. And there are 11 characters on this shot. Scholars still cannot decipher them. I know a scholar who tried to read it and claims he actually deciphered those characters, but his interpretation has not been widely accepted. But the earliest readable writing we call oracle bone inscriptions, and it's in the Shang dynasty. And what we can see is those writings contains many pictographs, like like pictures. Okay, so this is early Chinese writing. Pictographs existed in other civilizations in their early development. For instance, this is a stamp seal with images and found in Indus Valley civilization, and earlier than the Chinese oracle bone inscriptions. What we can see here is the inscriptions, and what we can also see that contained, I guess this is a fish, and this is like a bird. And also you can see that, and those are the inscriptions contain some pictographs. So it appears that the maximum number of the Indus script symbols is about 400. And although there are two basic signs, this means that Indus script is probably logophonetic, in that it has both the signs used for meanings and the ones used for their phonetic values. Actually, this is very similar to Chinese characters, where there was a connection between Indus Valley script and the Chinese writing. We don't know because this found in the current Pakistan, contemporary Pakistan, and it's very close to China. Okay, there any connections we still haven't found it. So this is the early inscription found in on bronze vessel, ritual vessels, also in the Shang Dynasty. At the top, right, upright corner, we can find a character. I guess all the audience can read it. That's their fish. Okay. So that's why, for this reason, some scholars use pictograph to define the early Chinese writing. This is a chart of the pictographs found on bronze vessels and oracle bone inscriptions. For instance, this is you can see the deer, right? This is the deer. This is the dragon, and this is something like a together. And what we can see here, this is an elephant, and this is a house or family, and related to modern Chinese character. And this character means step bu, which means you can see two footprints, okay, here. So this is the pictographs found in early Chinese writing. But as I mentioned before, pictographs existed in many early civilizations, not only in Chinese, not only in China. This is Maya Stele. We can find the inscriptions, the writings here, and Maya inscriptions have been deciphered by scholars. Now we can read them. So, for instance, this means they were born his lords. But what is interesting is that now this is a map of writing, okay, ancient civilizations and ancient writings. We can find the Maya hieroglyphs and Egyptian hieroglyphs, but we also found that by the 1000 BC or 7100 BC, we found alphabet. So here you can see the Phoenician, alphabet. It's 1000 BC, and here is 750 BC. But the Chinese here, the Chinese characters, either hieroglyphs or pictograph implies that the early writings contain pictorial elements, but the early Chinese writing is not an exception. But what you can see here, I can see that I mentioned that alphabet created somewhere between 1000 to 700 BC. Okay, here the area. But the Chinese, what is highly exceptional is that Chinese writing never went on alphabetic track, although it experienced several transformations. During its long history of evolution, several different scripts emerged. And this is a chart made by Professor Wang Fangyu. And this is an ancient graph, the symbols. This is a tiger, this is a dragon. Later became more abstract, and here tiger and dragon, tiger and dragon, and here he gives the dates of these transformations. And now this is tiger, dragon, tiger, dragon. This is 200 AD, and this is the appeared in the 100 AD. But even today, we still use this script. We call the regular script writing. So that means even you can see a clear track of evolution, but the Chinese writing never went on an alphabetic track. That is something quite exceptional. So this is we can see this is inscription found on the so-called stone drums. It's it's the date still is not very clear. Probably it's around the 5th century BC. What you can see here compared with the fish I have showed you. Now this character is a fish, but we still can see this is the tail, this is the head of the fish, this is the body of the fish. It became but it became much more balanced and regular. And this is the fish. Okay, now we can make a comparison. You can see here. This is it's about 700 apart. 700 apart. Among various changes and transformations, the most significant one was the so-called Li Bian, the clerical transformation, a transformation from the seal script to the clerical script. I would say that this is called the seal script calligraphy writing, a seal script calligraphy writing. And a transformation from the seal script to the clerical script, it took place from the 4th century BC to roughly, to 2nd century AD. And the inscription found in the Stele School, we can see, as I mentioned, this is called seal script, still have some pictorial elements remains. But now this is called the clerical script. And this part is the fish. I cannot find the fish but this part is the fish. You can see the tail became 4 dots. The head is here, the body became as close to a square, rectangular shape with abstract, streaked, and horizontal and vertical lines. And this is the clerical script. You can see the changes. And the different from the seal script, the clerical script has 2 features. First, the pictorial element completely disappeared. Second, it is more functional than less ritualistic. They're used for everyday writing rather than for ritual bronzes and stone objects. So this is a chart of transformation from the earlier script to the clerical script. This is the oracle bone script. This is the seal script. And then this is a clerical script. What you can see here, the structure changed. Here's much more balanced, actually. But here you can see the strokes extended. And this is we call the radical part of the component of the Chinese characters. After this, you can see the changes. It's related to walk. So now this is a clerical one. Structurally speaking, it became simpler. And then also the brushwork, the strokes became elongated and much more freer. So this is a comparison between seal script and the clerical script. What you can see here, the strokes in seal script, which is evenly pressed, rounded work. And what you can see here with the long tails, with much evident contrast between thinner beginning and heavier press here. So So what do I mean by functional? I use a term called functional. In the introduction of my lecture, you also I raised the question, where is the boundary between functional writing and the visual art? We should know that the driving force behind the clerical transformation was the social political demand that emerged from about the 4th century BC and the 2nd century AD, namely from the Warring States period to the Han Dynasty. There was a period when the feudal system was replaced by the bureaucratic system, built by the bureaucratic system. So, communication efficiency was the dominant driving force behind the clerical transformation, and the aesthetic pursuit followed. Okay, so what made the Chinese, the changes in Chinese scripts is actually the functional demand. Okay, because the bureaucratic ruling demanded efficiency, demanded the paperwork. Okay, so this period also witnessed the birth of the so-called cursive writing, a short-handed writing that is structurally simplified and executed with speed. So what we can see here is the bamboo slips, writing from the bamboo slips. You can see much rough, faster, informal, compared with the so-called stone drum inscription, very well balanced and nicely pressed, evenly pressed brushwork. But here we can see some strokes heavier, some lighter, and the structure is not actually, well balanced, and the writing is much faster. The seemingly casual writing was yielded by more complicated brush movement, turning, pausing, listing, pressing. This left various shapes of strokes and the character structures. In the end, it, to a large extent, enriched the expressive capacity of writing, although in its beginning, it might have not necessarily come out of a conscious effort. But as Lothar Lederhouse puts, the aesthetic potential of the brush strokes was developed step by step over the following centuries. Gradually, the artistic vocabulary of the Chinese writing enlarged, and by the 1st century AD, some people's handwritings, we may call it calligraphy, became collectible items. To turn writing into art became a constant and conscious pursuit, and has never terminated since then. Now let me summarize the two consequences of the clerical transformation discussed above. The pictorial elements completely disappeared. Chinese characters became abstract symbols. Yet, the Chinese writing didn't go on to the alphabetic track. The structures of characters are visually more plastic and complex than the alphabets. Second, without the restriction inhabited in the seal script writing any longer, the brush method was liberated, and the artistic vocabulary was thus enriched. Other material factors contributed to the formation of Chinese calligraphy as a fine art. This is we found a part shot in the Shang Dynasty. There's ink written character, and in this character we can see here with a beginning, heavy beginning, because this stroke is right from the left part to move it to the right end, and with a pointed end. And this stroke, you can see both ends is sharped, and the middle part of this work is wider. That means a brush work, when you press, and it became heavier, and you can see this character was written by a brush. And this is a Shang Dynasty bronze inscription. It's a rubbing, okay. What we can see here, some stroke the thicker part and with a pointed end. So we know, although it is carved and casted, but what we can see, the moving of the brush, okay. So we know that this is a brush, this is written by brush. So this is archaeologists found the ancient brush. What we can see here is made by animal hairs with a pointed end. This is pointed. So this is the Warring States period. This is about 4th century BC, something like that. Okay, you can see the pointed end of this brush work. So this is a picture showing that how the brushes are made. Okay, are made. So they are made by animal hairs, different whistles and shapes, and other animal hairs. Different hairs have different produce different artistic results. So now we can see that you can see here the brush with a very pointed became thin, but the strokes is very solid, and this kind of a brush actually inside of the there is a core in the middle of the brush, and covered by a hard core inside it, the brush animal hairs, so they can produce a very solid brush strokes. Where this one is there's no core. What you can see, the brush and the hairs actually split. But don't think this is a mistake. Actually, the artist actually purposely try to make this kind of effect. Okay, we still consider this is a masterpiece. So and what also we can see, this is on the right on silk. What we can see the turning here, and actually as an experienced calligrapher, I actually can tell whether or not this brush is when the calligrapher held the brush and the degree of his brush. But this one is not probably slanting. Okay, slanting the brush is not probably 70 degree rather than 90 degree. Okay, some calligraphers hold their brush usually in 90 degree, but when they when they are moving the brush, when they are writing, so they change the angles and then produce different shapes and different tones of the brush movement. Okay, so that's the effect of the brush method and the brush movement. But also during this period, and the invention and the improvement of paper also contributed to the development of writing as a visual art. So paper was probably found were made in the 2nd century, first to 2nd century, but early paper was not very nicely made, but the people gradually improved the technology of making nice paper. So it is not more than a coincidence that paper was invented while writing was becoming a vehicle of artistic expression. So now let's show that before paper was invented, we see writing carved on oracle bones, animal bones, and the turtle's shells, and also bronze cast on bronze vessels. But the major writing material is the bamboo slips and the wood plaque slabs. And this is what we found in the bamboo, but it's very narrow. You have to tie them together. But after paper was invented and improved, and the surface is very smooth, and then the space for multiple line writing became available. And the calligraphers, when they wrote their works, they don't have to finish one slip and then change to another slip. They just keep writing non-stoply and make the writing much more smooth. And the overall composition and they correspond to each other. So it's much more, nicer, okay? So nicely made paper with glossy surface is more sensitive than silk, bamboo, and wood. And it shows the subtle traces of brush movements. So actually from the 3rd to 5th century, we found prose, poems, praising how wonderful the nice paper is. So that's, so you can see, that's a new invention, and the improvement made the literati so excited about the new writing material. So the above mentioned arguments only touched the materiality of Chinese calligraphy in its early stage of development. Scholars both in China and the West, such as Chong Wenjun, Feng Shi, Jonathan Chaves, and Lothar Lederhus, have discussed, and many others have discussed, the religious and the cultural context in which Chinese writing developed into a fine art. Audiences may read their writings if interested. So limited by time, I will not touch this part, okay? So we can argue with confidence by the 3rd and the 4th centuries, Shu, in Chinese called Shu, we now translate as calligraphy, with the fact that we haven't found a better, substitute. Okay, this okay. So Shu was firmly established as visual art among the educated elite. So this is a summary, about the transformation in Chinese art, summarized by Professor Wu Hong, who teaches at the University of Chicago. And he argues that the mainstream of early Chinese art from Neolithic time to the end of the Han Dynasty can be characterized as ritual art tradition in which political and religious concepts were transformed into material symbols. In this tradition, forms that we know now called works of art were integral parts of larger monumental complexes such as temples and tombs. And their creators were anonymous craftsmen whose individual creativity was generally subordinated to larger cultural conventions. From the 3rd and the 4th centuries on, however, there appeared a group of individuals, scholars, officials, and art critics who began to forge their own history. These men of letters attempted to transform public art into their private possessions, either physically, artistically, or spiritually. This transformation started from calligraphy. Okay, I will say that calligraphy is the first art. Okay, first visual art actually created by the scholar official class. So as Simon Leys writes in One More Art, calligraphy in the narrow sense of the word, etc. Writing considered as artistic pursuit, as a means of self-expression, and an outlet for the calligrapher's individual sensibility, began to develop at the end of the Han period, 3rd century AD. From that time on, it progressively turned to a specialized discipline with its masters, theorists, and the critics, collectors, and the leading position among all the visual arts. The leading position, okay, with painting as its close second. But for someone like me who has practiced calligraphy since youth and studied the history of calligraphy for more than 30 years, some fundamental questions about calligraphy have not been well answered. Probably I will never be able to find completely satisfactory answers. So I share my the puzzling questions. One of the puzzling and the challenging questions is, where is the boundary between functional writing and visual art? Calligraphy is an art based on writing, and writing is a method of communication. As I mentioned, functional writing actually, efficiency actually is the driving force behind the transformations of Chinese scripts. And in those days, when there were no galleries and museums in the modern sense for collecting and displaying works of art, letters became a vehicle to show off one's calligraphy and were showcases for calligraphers' achievement. Most early masterpieces survived by known calligraphers are letters. Now let's see some of the letters I have shown now in the Imperial Collection of Japan. Okay, it's a private letter. The written content, the text is about a very sad event. Okay, but the writing considered to be wonderful. We can see the subtlety of the brush movement, different shapes of the work, the natural connections. Okay, the smooth work. Okay, but the text is everyday event. Okay, everyday event. This is another work, a private letter attributed to Wang Xienzhi, the son of the calligrapher I just showed, discussing actually something very routine. Okay, I showed the detail of the work. It's nothing beautiful. It's very modern. So, but I show you an interesting story, but it's an anecdote, and describing during that period how the aristocratic among them, use letters to compete their calligraphy. So Wang Xienzhi once wrote a letter of around 10 pages to the Emperor Jianmen. In the end, he wrote, "My calligraphy in this letter is decent. I wish it to be kept and stored away." So you can see he used a polite way and to to show, he considered his writing is pretty good. So another anecdote by Yu He, sorry, this should be Yu He, describes how aristocrats use the letter writing to compete with one another in calligraphy. Xian, who excelled in calligraphy, holds no high opinion of Wang Xianzhi's calligraphy. I just mentioned that the guy, he considered his calligraphy is decent. Okay, decent actually is a modest way, but he considered his calligraphy is excellent. Okay, so he wrote a letter. When Wang Xianzhi wrote a letter in excellent calligraphy to Xian, he thought Xie would appreciate it. He may collect it. But Xian wrote his reply on the back of Wang Xianzhi's letter and returned it. So that means, oh, your work, your letter is not do not deserve to be collected, or something like that. Okay. So if letters were written with an intention of demonstrating one's achievement in calligraphy and manifesting its skills and aesthetic values, we may say that this is a conscious artistic pursuit, even when letter writing as such is functional for communication. So it's sometimes it's very difficult to separate the two. But what makes us pause and ponder is the phenomenon that the best three masterpieces of running script calligraphy are drafts. Let's see it. This is the Tang copy, tracing copy of Wang Xianzhi. The original work no longer existed. So this is a Tang Dynasty tracing paper. This is in the 7th century AD. And it's a preface to the gathering at the Orchid Pavilion. What you can see here, the writer forgot the two characters and he just write aside some part in the later part. And you even can see his, for instance, this character, and he, after he made a mistake, actually he rewrote it to cover it. So this is not, this is a quite informal writing, and this is a draft. And this is another one we consider the number 2 running script calligraphy and masterpieces by Yan Zhenqing of the 8th century. It is a eulogy to his nephew. He was killed in a rebellion. And what you can see here, he crossed the writings, and here it's to someone you probably think it's kind of messy, but we consider it as a masterpiece, and the masterpiece and untrammeled expression of his sorrow, and the brushwork is so fast but still accurate, executed in a very accurate way. But this is a poems written in Huangzhou on Cold Food Festival by Su Shi, renowned literatus of the Northern Song Dynasty. I'm not sure this is, he copied it again, and what you can see here, character thickness, and he missed, and he put here, and here the 3 dots means this is a wrong character, something like that, and also written in a rather casual way. So all these 3 pieces considered to be number 1, number 2, and number 3. They are all of them are drafts. So we encounter the following question: were the writers or calligraphers carrying an intention to make it a piece of beautiful calligraphy when writing those essays and poems, or was he simply drafting his essay, or both? Both, because one cannot separate the two in many cases. in many cases. Probably we can differentiate various types of writing. For instance, Mr. Bloom, Philip Bloom, and showed a name placard I wrote for the garden This is intentional work. Okay, I try to make it as nice as possible. I tried to, but this is a folding fan written by Wu Dacheng, nicely balanced, carefully written. What you can see here, we know that he tried to make artwork. He tried to make a nice artwork. But here, this is the garden. I wrote a couplet for the East Asian Garden of Huntington Library. This is definitely, I try to write it carefully. So this is recently we have an exhibition in my museum. This is a pavilion. We try to make copy a pavilion of the Ming Dynasty. There's a name placard. I wrote it. It's called Accent Ink Pavilion. So actually, I wrote it in a very careful way, and they are nicely carved. So all those works actually are, with the intention of art making. But for me, who lives in the 20th century, and 21st century, the routine writing tools are different from the ancient time, when tools for daily writing and for calligraphy were the same. To separate what writing were calligraphy from what were not easy. So once someone writing owns great appeal, and we call in Chinese called 善书, his or her writing written on whatever occasion and for whatever purpose could be viewed as art, a collectible object. So for instance, this is, I wrote a book about this calligrapher, and Fu Shan. And he was a writer, he wrote books, and he was a thinker, he was a painter, but he was also a doctor. And this is his prescriptions. People consider nice calligraphy and collected them. So what you can see here, did he try to make it an artwork when he wrote those prescriptions? Those prescriptions were sent to pharmacies when people get them. So what makes things more complicated is that some leading literary figures and art critics even praised and promoted unintentional writing as better or even the best calligraphy. So Shu Shi claims calligraphy originally done without aim at excellence is therefore excellent. So above, I translate Shu as calligraphy. In fact, Shu in Chinese may mean to write, verb, writing, physical result of writing on paper, and calligraphy. Here, Shu Shi means visual form of writing. So that's one. So would Shu Shi have substituted calligraphy with other types of artistic pursuits? For instance, now let's try it. Painting originally done without aim at excellence is therefore excellent. Can you do that? No, it's very difficult. Okay, now we say the bronze originally done without aim at excellence is therefore excellent. Sculpture, architecture, you just cannot substitute those art. Only calligraphy suits here perfectly. But why? It is the art of calligraphy that emphasizes more than other arts the importance of immediacy, spontaneity, and unexpected outcomes of the writing process. For this reason, routine writings by someone who excelled in calligraphy could become masterpieces, even when her texts were mundane, and she didn't have an intention to create art. So this is a letter written by Mi Fu, excellent 12th century. I forgot to give the date, and a letter to thank his friend who sent him some, oranges. Nice, very confident writing, and with very smooth strokes and with the power, something like that. Therefore, the fine line of functional writing and calligraphy was unclear in ancient China, or we may say that it is exactly those functional writings made some calligraphers forget that they are making art. Masterpieces were created by excellence. There were unexpected outcomes. One of the reasons why people viewed some unintentional writings as masterpieces is a deeply rooted belief. Calligraphy manifests one's inner world. It is traces of mind. Using Professor Wen Fang's words, calligraphy is embodied image. It is the embodiment of the person behind the writing, character within the character of the character. In the Qing Dynasty, a Stele School of calligraphy emerged. The boundary between functional writing and the visual art became more blurred. I wrote a book about this question. I showed you that. The central question, I just jumped at it. Okay. So during this, after the Qing Dynasty, the Stele School and some clumsy and immature writings carved on stones also became new models of calligraphy learning. They were considered to be original, powerful. So here, Fu Shan wrote that he once saw the children's writing. He thought it so wonderful, and you can find the heaviness, and you can find the harmonious writings. And this is remind me that the Picasso and the Kandinsky actually learned from children's writings. And this is the inscription on Buddhist stele at the Roman cave in Luoyang. Okay, this is carved by someone actually not very skillful writings, but people now, after the Stele School emerged in Qing Dynasty, people started to appreciate of this kind of writing. Okay, now let me discuss the last question of my talk today. What are the social functions of Chinese calligraphy? Many years ago, Lederhouse published 2 articles on Chinese calligraphy. One is entitled Chinese Calligraphy, Art of the Elite. The other is Chinese Calligraphy, its aesthetic dimension and the social function. In the latter, Lederhouse argues, as long as the literati made their appearance in the 1st century AD, the aesthetic dimensions in the practice of writing began to be explored. Writing was turned into calligraphy. In doing this, the literati helped foster the social cohesiveness of their class, which in turn was a prerequisite for the political cohesiveness and stability. If this thesis about the social function of calligraphy is correct, it then follows that the particular features of Chinese calligraphy, those which are unique in a perspective of world art and which cannot be found in European or Islamic writing, for example, are precisely those features that engender social cohesiveness. Lederhouse then lists the 3 features of writing he believes that cannot be found in other civilizations. First, the factors of time and movement in a work of calligraphy, because I explain it very briefly. That means, you know, you appreciate because calligraphy is executed follow the writing, okay? So it's a temporal, there's a temporal order. You cannot like painting, you paint a rock first, or you paint a bamboo first, you put together, it doesn't matter. You know, you see the final result. But to execute a calligraphy, you follow the writing order. Okay, so there's a temporal dimension. The second, the technical and the stylistic cohesiveness in the artistic tradition. Third, the mode of transmission of canonical masterpieces. Because calligraphy is not a representational art, so you have to copy the masterpieces left by early masters, something like that. Similar to the music, okay? You cannot like a painting, you have a model, you can, you know, draw, make some drawings of the landscape, something like that. So this is what he says. Well, recognizing that Lederhouse's general argument remains valid, I would like to show various uses of calligraphy in Chinese society to demonstrate the social functions of Chinese calligraphy. So this is what you can see. This is in the 8th century by the emperor. Okay, inscriptions. This here, and then the following dynasties. And this is made in the carved on the rocks, made in the 16th century. And this is the name placard. We have the East Asian Garden in the Huntington Library. Similar here, you can see here the couplets, the name placard. Well, this is the Palace Forbidden City. What you can see, calligraphy also decorated the interior of this palace. So, and also in Chinese literary garden, you can see here's the engraved stone tablets, actually installed in the wall on the wall of this garden. So now I take officials of a later Qing period as examples to show some aspects of calligraphy. Practicing calligraphy daily through copying historical canons was very common among government officials in the pursuit of improved calligraphy. Okay, I will try to finish as soon as possible. This is Ong Tonghe, and an imperial tutor. Okay, he was a tutor of the emperor, 2 emperors. Now he is copying ancient Stele in the year 1889. And here is Li Hongzhang, another senior government official, and a very, very powerful person. And his copy of the preface of Buddhist holy teaching. And here he gave the date. He almost copied every day. Okay, it's about 100 characters. That's his everyday practice. So in the later Qing period, the most popular formats of calligraphy were fan and the couplets. So for instance, this is what we call the couplets. I showed you, I wrote the couplets for the East Asian Garden at the Huntington Library. This is the folding fan with the calligraphy. Well, this is important. In the later Ming officials, especially high-ranking officials, well-known calligraphers, wrote large numbers of couplets. For instance, this is Zheng Guofan, a senior government official, and he wrote 1 month, he wrote 100, more than 100 couplets. For the other months, he wrote 146 couplets. And the calligraphy works were widely used as gifts on various social occasions. And the couplets, for instance, this is Ong Tonghe, escorted his later wife and his brother's coffin, back to his hometown for burial. And what you can see here, local officials actually provide helps. and he paid the money. Besides the monetary compensation, Wang Zhonghe gifted these military escorts, fans, and couplets. That's on the, for instance, on the 15th of the 8th month of the 1868, he wrote, "Tonight, I sent back 2 low-ranking military officers, gave them 10 taels of silver each, and together with fans and couplets." So this is a personal gift. This is the fees he must pay. So officials in the capital also, if they held the civil service examinations, so they have a responsibility to write calligraphy for those who failed the exam as a farewell gifts. This is a very common practice because they will never meet each other. So though government officials wrote many calligraphy, they didn't sell their works. Writing calligraphy for their relatives, friends, and colleagues was virtually their obligation. For this reason, we may say that a major social function of Chinese calligraphy was to reinforce the cohesiveness of the elite, as Ledros argues. So to conclude, Chinese calligraphy poses ongoing challenges to various notions of visual art and beyond, and provokes collective investigation about this art. So now, thank you. My talk, and now I would like to answer questions if the audiences have some questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Bai. That was a fantastic overview of calligraphy, or the art of writing. Just a couple of days ago, Professor Bai sent me a text message and said he was working on his talk and that it was very difficult. It was very cryptic. He just said calligraphy, a very difficult subject. It seems like you overcame that difficulty very quickly. I learned so much from what you've just presented. So thank you very much. I also meant to mention earlier that our exhibition focuses purely on contemporary works of calligraphy that are, as Professor Bai put it, intentionally created as works of art. And so part of the goal with our lecture series was to invite scholars to kind of fill out the history of calligraphy a little bit more, since we weren't able to do that in the exhibition itself. And I'm so grateful that Professor Bai inaugurated the lecture with this very grand overview. We have a lot of questions so far. So I'll start with one that I'm very curious about. When you're looking at a work of calligraphy, can you tell whether the calligrapher is left-handed or right-handed?
I cannot, but what do you, first I cannot, but I would say that the Chinese writing was designed for right hand. If we found a left-handed person, a boy is left-handed, and he can use his chopsticks, the left-handed, the left hand, it's okay, and he can use his left hand to play ping pong and play sports and whatever. But he's in ancient time, as I will know, and his family member will ask him, his father will ask him to use right hand to write, to learn how to write. So actually, about 10 years ago, even earlier, there was a scholar wrote a very interesting paper and discussed why left-handed writing was considered to be bad writing. He's in Chinese we call it 左道旁门, also 左道旁门. Actually, it's a discrimination of left hand. so anyway, he wrote a very interesting. I forgot his argument, but it's interesting. I remember it's a very interesting paper arguing that why people actually force their children to change to right hand. So I guess all the writings in ancient time, and it's designed for, because it's designed for right hand. Why? Because I taught calligraphy in Boston at Boston University, and I have many American kids. Actually, they are left-handed. They took my class. I just cannot ask them to use right hand to practice calligraphy, because but when they use left hand to write calligraphy, actually when they move the brush, so for some reason actually block their view. Actually, block their view. The stroke movement block the view. But there was one girl. I still kept her calligraphy. She is amazing, and she is left-handed, and she actually took my class, used right hand to write calligraphy, practice calligraphy, and she got an A. Okay. And there was another girl, because I also taught them how to carve seals, and she purposely carved a seal. The text of that seal means right hand, and she actually is left-handed. So that's interesting. Okay, thank you for the question.
There's another question about the criteria that are used to judge a particular example of calligraphy as a masterpiece. You mentioned those three very famous examples of running script that are considered the masterpieces. So can you just talk a little bit about how those, for example, how did the idea that calligraphy should be like a direct, unmediated expression come about and unintentional?
Yes, it's a difficult question. Okay.
Yeah.
Why you say that? How if you ask a critic why this piece of music is good, personally, actually, for critics or for people experienced calligraphers, we all have a reference framework. Okay, a framework of reference, and we store a huge body of writings in our mind. And also we have, that's one of the argument by Lederhouse. He argues that since we copied the same canonical works of ancient time, we use the same model. So for later generations, actually, we know how to judge them. So I mentioned that, for instance, we know, we can tell how confident the brush work, how smooth the brush work, and how technically he balanced the structure. Even he wrote in a very speedy way. But this is only part of that. Okay, only part of that is we call the technical competence. Okay, when not you have the skill. Skill is the first thing. You have the skill. If you are very skillful, you can do it. But the skill is only part of the work. Just like you judge the diving. Okay, skill is part, and the artistic, the skating, right? You have the degree of difficulty. You judge, this technical part, but you also have an artistic part. So in this part, actually, that's why we called, I said that the character of the character in the character. Okay, okay. That means the character means the spiritual part. One's character is a disposition. Okay. one's cultivation or something like that, this part, and in the character, and behind that, that's the character of the person. Okay, the person behind that. So that's actually is a deeply rooted work. Actually, in fact, actually, we can judge actually the work. And a French scholar, Xiong Bingming, a Chinese scholar who lived in Paris, passed away quite a few years ago. And he wrote a book, and actually later at the highest level, we judge the artwork for their spiritual achievement rather than skill. And for instance, when not actually is solidness and solemn and untrammeled, and something that a technical part for those calligraphers is not an issue. Okay, it's only it's when not that their works can reveal the inner world and the spiritual level of their work. So that's very difficult to explain, but I would say the reason calligraphy became a fine art, when people treat it as a fine art, is because of this part of the art rather than the technical. Right, it's balanced and very skillful, and it's this is a basic requirement. Did I answer your question?
I think that answers it quite well. It's a very complicated question.
Yes. I just meant that we have references. You can judge. Right. This turn, for instance, Su Shi's turn, this part, he turned earlier than other calligraphers, and he turned earlier than other calligraphers. You can view it as a failure, okay? Or you can view it as a creative if he managed very well. He breaks the rules and created the new rules. That's why it's creation, right? So, yeah.
There's also a kind of related question about the relationship between unintentional calligraphy and painting. So did that preference for unintentional, spontaneous writing affect how painting was judged in China as well? For example, the preference for xie over gongbi, or the preference for sketch conceptualism as opposed to detailed, meticulous brushwork painting.
Yes. Definitely influenced the xie. So I mentioned that for calligraphy is much more suitable use the unintentional. But of course, many xie painting is unintentional. And for instance, like Liang Kai's, the Zen painting, and the Mu Qi's Zen painting, very spontaneous too, right? So because it's complicated, so I use the example. But for painting, many painting, when you paint, because painting is not functional, even it has function. The functional here, I mean, is everyday routine. Okay, so painting is not a routine. I have a discussion is that if for a civilized, say for a civilization, with writing is standard for judging whether or not there's a civilization. For a civilization, if an emperor passed away, the government can ban painting for 100 days. The society still worked. But if they ban writing for 100 days, as you just cannot go to recite the names of the herb medicine to a pharmacy saying that I try to buy this. You cannot do that. Writing is writing. Once you have writing, we rely on writing. So, and those writings are functional. Painting, of course, has its function, religious function, political function. What I mean is everyday necessity. So that's kind of functional. Okay. So what I mean is the functional. Okay. For instance, you unless you are art major. Otherwise, when you write a paper, term paper, no matter it's sociology or international relations, you write, right? You can write it, you write it, if you are beautiful, you are wonderful calligraphers, you use a brush. That can be calligraphy masterpieces. That's why you can see, it's very, very confusing. You can see the auction houses, now they sell the diaries, letters, and even the receipt of the you borrow money from certificate of borrowing money from someone, all became calligraphy. That's why it's very difficult. So that why I said that it proposed a challenge to the notions of art theory, notions of art theory. For instance, what is work? What does it mean, artwork? What does it mean? What do you mean creation, create? What do you mean intention? Sometimes there's no intention. It's not for artwork. It's not create. It's just write out. So that's why it challenges the many the theories of art. The notion of theories of art. So that's why it's that's why it's confusing too. Okay. Okay.
This is a somewhat related question, but are there any examples of scholars writing beautiful gibberish, so totally meaningless lines, but what a viewer might see as calligraphy? So
yeah,
were there calligraphers who just concentrated purely on form or on flow, or simply on making marks, but without necessarily conveying any content?
Yeah. In the 20th century, in the 60s and the 70s, there was a school of ink image by, I forgot his name, Yu Xuechun. His Japanese name I forgot. I should have it. And he actually led a school, a group of followers, and to write something, created some work they called ink image. And the brush work came from calligraphy, but the flow, the dot, the brush work, but it is unreadable because it's not based on characters. So I call this as abstract calligraphy, if you call calligraphy, but it's so that's why they call ink image rather than calligraphy. But it's part of the modern movements of Japanese calligraphy.
Actually, that brings up another question. Can you talk a little bit about what influence, if any, there is of Chinese calligraphy on Japan? I know that's a vast question, but
I would say that yes, Japan, Chinese writing was introduced into Japan about the 5th century, 6th century. And after that, Chinese calligraphy was introduced into Japan. For many, many centuries, Chinese calligraphy influenced the Japanese calligraphy. But Japanese people invented their own writing, that is hiragana, hiragana calligraphy. Hiragana, of course, the symbols came from the cursive writing, part of the cursive writing. Some of them totally, copied from cursive writing, but it's alphabetic symbol. and the writing highly simplified and very cursively oriented. So very linear, the movement is very, very linear. So what we can see that hiragana calligraphy actually influenced the Japanese calligraphy writing. And the hiragana, they make the Japanese writing in general very flowing, I would say that, fluid. And that's one, it's the Japanese own creation. And in the 20th century, actually the influence, the direction changed. Influenced by Western art theory, started from the 1930s, Japanese calligraphers launched the so-called modern calligraphy movement, especially in the fastly developed in the 50s and the 60s, and after the American occupation of Japan, and after World War II, actually. And since then, Japanese calligraphers developed many different schools. In the 80s, after China reopened its door, this practice was introduced into China, and had very profound impact on Chinese modern calligraphy movements. Okay, so but also influenced by all kinds of Western theories of art and practice, such as calligraphy installation. Okay, and the Xu Bing's work, as you know, right, very conceptual, and they use calligraphy as sources of innovation rather than follow the tradition of Chinese calligraphy.
But maybe we'll ask two final questions. So one is, several people have asked about basically the status of calligraphy in the present, given that people, as you said in your talk, people no longer write with brushes every day. We have printing now, we have digital technology. Can you tell us a little bit about what is going on with calligraphy in general in China today? Okay,
I actually I wrote a paper on the transformation of Chinese calligraphy in the 20th century, early part of that. The first part, I would say that calligraphy actually in the past had its institutional foundation. That is one of the institutional foundation. The first is the art of the elite, as Lederhouse argues. And also the institutional foundation was the civil service exam, because calligraphy was part of that, especially at the top level of the exam. And calligraphy played a very important role for judging the classes of the, for those who passed the exam. So that's a very, for this reason, what you can see that many senior government officials were calligraphers. Okay, sometimes you can call them calligraphers, but they all, to some extent, were trained in calligraphy. I would say that. But the civil service examination was abolished in 1905, and the modern education system was introduced into China. And also the tools of writing, of everyday writing, was replaced by pen and pencil, now by computer. Okay, so no longer actually brush is everyday routine writing tool. So for this reason, people argue that calligraphy became more pure as an art, separated from functional writing. But meanwhile, what you can see here is that Chinese calligraphy is no longer the art of the elite. Okay, although there are still some government or social elite, the government officials still like to practice calligraphy, but there was no requirement. Okay, in the past, emperors all practiced calligraphy, almost all the emperors. Okay, except the first emperor of the dynasty, probably he seized the power by military power. You know, he was poorly educated, but he will educate his son to learn calligraphy. He will ask his son to practice calligraphy. So, but this has changed. I would say that calligraphy is no longer an art of the social elite. So his social status also actually no longer as the most important art in China. Okay, now what you can see here also in the past, architecture and sculpture were raised. Their social status were raised in China, and today we have colleges, art academies. Actually, they have students majored in art. They became professional artists, calligraphers. Okay, after the graduation, they probably became tutors and teachers of calligraphy, something. But in general, actually, I would say that if auction prices as mark, okay, you will find that modern painters sell much better than modern calligraphers. Okay, that's why no longer you can say that actually, painting is the close second. No longer. Okay, sculptors and architects. So and also other conceptual artists. So that's why the social status of calligraphy changed significantly in contemporary China. So that's my answer.
Thank you. And then the final question is just, is there one particular book that you would recommend in English as an overview of calligraphy? And actually, as a corollary to that, if someone only reads English and doesn't read Chinese, how would you recommend that they go about learning calligraphy? Two questions.
That sounds very difficult.
You've taught many.
When I taught calligraphy in America, in several schools, I used a textbook written by Jiang Yi. It's a very old. It's called Chinese Calligraphy. It was written in the 1930s, and many there are some mistakes because he didn't know the new archaeological discoveries and the new researches of paleography. But it's very introductory, because he was a writer. He wrote essays and novels. So it's easy to write, but it was written in the 1930s. That time, it's in the Second World War, World War II, and he a lot of praises of Chinese cultural, Chinese uniqueness of, something like that. It's a little bit, out of date, but in general, still it's a very readable work. For many years, people try to write a textbook for calligraphy. I was even asked by publishers, but so far actually, no, not. The book is small, very easy to read. Probably another book by Zheng Youhe, Betty something, it's called Chinese Calligraphy too. It has, I'm not sure she's still alive, and she passed away.
I think she passed away just within the past year or two.
Okay. So that she published a book in English, published by the Chinese University of Hong Kong, or I'm also University of Hong Kong University. That book is very has many information Chinese book doesn't have. Now that's I'm not sure it's available. available.
I know that Zhang Yi's book is still published. I'm not sure about Zhang Yi's.
Yeah, that's yeah.
I don't think it's been reissued.
Yeah, yeah. Zhang Yi's book, no one actually no, it's a historical record, okay? Because you know, it's easy to read and very introductory, but there are quite a few mistakes meanwhile. But he passed away in the 1970s, and he couldn't revise it. But it's a good introduction to Chinese calligraphy.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Professor Bai. This was wonderful. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and time so generously with us.
But thank you for listening. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everyone.